The story of Rosewood, Florida is one of the most devastating and often overlooked examples of racial violence in American history. Rosewood was a small, self-sufficient black town in Levy County, Florida, founded in the late 1800s. By the 1920s, it was a prosperous, tight-knit community made up of black families who owned land, homes, and businesses, including a school, churches, and a turpentine mill. But in January 1923, the town was destroyed over a lie. A white woman in the nearby town of Sumner falsely claimed she was assaulted by a black man. Without investigation or evidence, white mobs from surrounding towns began to gather, blaming a black man from Rosewood. When they couldn't find a suspect, they turned their rage on the entire town. Over the next several days, white mobs burned Rosewood to the ground. Homes were torched. Churches and schools were destroyed. Black residents were hunted, beaten, and killed. Some families escaped by hiding in the nearby woods for days. Others were secretly rescued by sympathetic local white residents. The violence lasted for about a week, and by the end of it, Rosewood no longer existed. An estimated 6 to 27 people were killed, most of them black, though the exact number remains unknown due to the silence and cover-up that followed. Survivors were never compensated. The story was buried for decades, kept alive only by the memories of those who survived. It wasn't until the 1980s that the Rosewood Massacre began to receive national attention. In 1994, more than 70 years after the attack, the state of Florida finally passed a law awarding $2.1 million in reparations to the survivors and descendants. It was one of the first times in U.S. history that Black Americans received compensation for racial violence. The destruction of Rosewood is not just a story of racist violence. It's a story of stolen land, erased Black wealth, and a legal system that failed to protect its citizens. It reminds us that even prosperous, peaceful Black communities were never safe from white supremacy, and it stands as a critical part of American history that must never be forgotten.
We are in Rosewood, Florida. This is Highway 24. Gulf of Mexico and Cedar Key is 9 miles that way. Gainesville is about 40 miles this way. You're now in Rosewood, Florida. Welcome. We are in Sumner. The whole Rosewood mess started here in Sumner. The Cumberland Lumber Company was located here, and it was here to take out the rosewood trees that grew in this area. And it had quarters for blacks and quarters for whites. And they were all working, most of them worked for the lumber company, taking out the rosewood trees. Fannie Taylor, whose husband worked for the company, in fact, it was his job to light off the equipment in the morning, so he was out of the house early to come up here to start the equipment. And Fannie Taylor, who lived here, had a white boyfriend who worked on that train that connected Cedar Key and Gainesville, the Seaboard Airline Railway. And he would come and spend time with her while the train was in Cedar Key, and then hop back on when the train would leave to go to Gainesville. And this whole mess started because she claimed that a black man assaulted her, when in fact it was her white boyfriend. Now we know that a black woman named Sarah Carrier was at this woman's house here in Sumner when this incident with her and her boyfriend took place. And she said, she told the black folks back in Rosewood, that this white man beat this woman up. It was not a black man. But that lie brought these white folks here in Sumner out in droves. They came out from Cedar Key to find this black man that assaulted, allegedly, Fannie Taylor. And that was the beginning of the Rosewood Massacre. Now this road leads to the Shallow Cemetery, which is the white cemetery here in Sumner. I've been here several times before, but it's important to note that this is not a public cemetery. 2 white men were killed during the Rosewood event. Polly Wilkerson was one of them. Polly Wilkerson was the boss of the section of Sumner, where the black workers lived. He was in charge of their quarters, and they could boots. They say because if you didn't move fast enough, he'd kick you. So Polly Wilkerson was a white man here in Sumner, some authority over the black people. And when the Rosewood attack happened at the Carrier House, which you'll hear more about, but when the Rosewood matter kicked off, Polly Wilkerson was one of the 2 white men who approached the Carrier House and was killed by Sylvester Carrier. And he's buried here. Now for a number of years, if you walk through that gate to section B, right here, you can see the markings for the Wilkerson grave. We're going to walk now over to the graves of J.W. Wright and his wife, who are the white heroes of Rosewood. J.W. Wright and his wife hid black people in their home during the attack on the black community of Rosewood. The Wrights owned the general store in Rosewood, and their home was the only home left standing after the massacre. J.W. Wright, his wife Mary Wright, the heroes of Rosewood, and they paid for it. They paid dearly for what they did in protecting black people, because white folks here knew that they had done that, and some people resented that. So after the Rosewood massacre was over, they were ostracized. They were cut off socially from other white people here. But they are the white heroes of Rosewood. We are now on the property that was owned by J.W. Wright and his wife, a white couple that owned the general store. One of the things that they did was to allow children to hide in their well. This well right here. During the daytime, the children couldn't stay in the house because they might have been spied. So they were set out to hide in the well during the daytime. Now mind you, it was cold, very, very time. But they were allowed to come out here and hide in this well during the daytime. And at night, the children and some of the adults, women only, no boys over 13, were allowed to go inside the house and hide in the bedrooms upstairs. This well itself is historic. The house was built in 1903. At that time, this was considered a very, very home. Mr. Wright and his wife were now. The inside is very well appointed. This is a shell road. A lot of the roads in this area were made from grinding up the clamshells, and this road is such a road. So imagine it's January 1923. Cold happens. And the mob is coming down this street. It was a hard road then, it wasn't paved then. And they're coming along the railroad track. And this man and his wife allowed some people to hide upstairs in those bedrooms. And they saved lives by doing that. So this was a very heroic thing that they did. These are rosewood trees. They are also witness trees, because these trees were here when the massacre took place. Look at the size of these things. This is what they were after. These trees are hundreds of years old. It took a long time to get this big. The only reason that these two survived is because they were in the front yard of the people who owned the property. These trees were standing when the massacre happened, and they're true witness trees. So we have turned off Highway 24 onto 96th Terrace, which leads down to the Dunn property. In front of me is the cul-de-sac where this road ends, but also it is very close to where the home of Lexi Gordon, one of the black victims of the Rosewood Massacre, was killed. So let's go to the end of the street. These are all 5-acre lots out here. You can't buy anything smaller than 5 acres. The Rosewood Masonic Lodge was located in this area. I'll point to it in just a moment. We're going to go all the way through to the end of the street. Most of the black men, or at least many of the black men in Rosewood, were Masons. And the Masonic Lodge was the largest building in Rosewood. This cul-de-sac shows where the railroad came through. There was a trestle here for the railroad coming in to and from Gainesville. The Masonic Lodge was located as you go around this curve, that property, the Masonic Lodge. Lexi Gordon's house was on the other side of where you see these dormers. She was a sick woman. She lived here with her daughter, possibly 2 daughters, and when the mob came this way from Cedar Key and got to her house, her daughters had gone to get them out of the house, but she couldn't leave because she was sick. When the mob got here, she ran out of her house, trying to get to the outhouse that was behind her home, and they shot her dead as she tried to make it to the outhouse. That was Lexi Gordon. I think she was the last victim of the last Black Rosewood Massacre. When I first came out here, I turned off Highway 24 as we just did. So I came down to this cul-de-sac, got out, and I walked over to where you see this wood pile here. And that's where the railroad came through. And I saw a green tunnel coming across here, and I thought that was the old railroad track. And that is what sparked my interest in finding out more about what was in Rosewood. Well, we're now approaching the Dunn property. It's going to be on our left. That pink ribbon marks the beginning of my property. The railroad came right across here to that cul-de-sac that you saw. Came right across this property. We are now at the Dunn property in Rosewood. I am the only black person today who owns land in Rosewood. The first thing I want you to see is a real rosewood tree. That's this tree. I have the rosewood trees marked with pink ribbon. This is a very, very young rosewood. Rosewood trees take a long, long time to build. Cypress, they're slow growers. Here's another one over here. These trees survived being cut out. These are baby trees, but these are the trees that the loggers were after. Rosewood is very valuable because if you cut through this tree, it has beautiful pink and red wood that was highly for furniture. When we acquired this land several years ago, it was so thick that once I rode into about this far, I couldn't find my way out. It was so overgrown. We've had university students here and other volunteers that have been working to clear this property to make it as beautiful as it is. And it's going to stay this way. I've had students come out to plant azaleas because I found out that many of the Rosewood families had azalea bushes in their yards. So we planted azalea out here. I'll show you some of the bushes that the students planted. We bring our Teach the Truth tour here. We have lunch here on the site. And we do a Black History talk here on the Dunn property. These, when I first brought students out here, they planted these azaleas. I found out years ago when I visited the site of the AME church. The church was gone, burned down during the massacre. But I found the church site one Sunday morning in the springtime, and it had azalea bushes that were 8, 10, 12 feet tall and had not been tended in a century. And they were full blown, red, pink. It looked as if the woods were on fire. And I later learned that many of the Rosewood residents had azaleas and roses in their yards. And that's why students have come up on trips here and planted azalea bushes on my property, and roses. Let's walk through the railroad. Now you see as we go through the piles of trash, debris from the hurricane that have been stacked up by our students. I've had 2 student groups to come up, and they have done the work that you see here in piling up this trash. When the 100th anniversary of the Rosewood event happened, I had an event here in the property. We had many people. Our Masons were here in their numbers. We had a ceremony marking the event, and we will continue to do that. We're now mounting up onto the railroad track, and here we are. Look at this. Now my property begins back there where you see the logs stacked up. That's the beginning of the Dunn property. And this is the railroad track, the Seaboard Airline Railroad. This railroad was laid by enslaved men, paid for by white people, of course. And this railroad connected Gainesville, about 40 miles that way, and Cedar Key, about 9 miles this way. And this is the railroad track that Fannie Taylor's boyfriend, the train that brought him to and fro, came along this railroad. The rosewood trees were timbered out. The railroad, the lumber company left this area and moved to an area closer to Tampa. And they took the rails with them, but the railroad bed remains here. Generous donors have given us money to allow us to have seating out here. This one, for example, was donated by my daughter and her husband. Another thing that should be pointed out here is, look at this. This is yellow pine. This is very valuable wood. And you see them all over the property. One of the things that we're going to do is bring back rosewood trees and these yellow pine trees on this property and on the J.W. Wright property, which we'll talk about in a little while. These pine trees are very valuable. So we're going to go all the way to the end of the clearing, which is the extent of the Dunn property. Now it's very important to note that on this side is the J.W. Wright property. 36 acres of rosewood property owned by J.W. Wright abuts my property. This railroad track separates the 2 properties. 5 acres over here, 36 acres over here that belong to Mr. Wright that is now being discussed for acquisition by the Miami Center for Racial Justice. Through the assistance of my researcher Janice Owens, who lives in this area, we found out that there was a hotel on this property. The Ford Hotel was built here on this property, probably right over here, because there's a spring, the freshwater spring that we leave when we walk all the way around. One of the ways that we can tell where structures stood in Rosewood are palmetto bushes. The palmetto palms come up first after a fire. And I was able to identify where houses and other structures were by looking for the growth of palmetto palms. Part of this property is a wetland protected by the state, as it should be. It's dry now, but during the wet season, you'll find water pretty much along this ditch here. See how this wetland, this was all water. You can see when it's raining and when the water is coming through. All this is here. Now, in just a few moments, we're going to stop at an old rosewood tree that's dead that we're going to harvest, and I'll explain what we're going to do with it. The hotel was the Ford Hotel. We think it stood on this side of the property. There's a freshwater spring over there. And the reason that that hotel was there was rich white people believed that they could come bathe in the spring water and that that would be a healing for them. And so we think the Ford Hotel was built here for that purpose. Again, these fine yellow pine. Now here's the dead rosewood tree right here. We're going to stop here for a moment. Marked with pink ribbon. You can get a nature of these trees. Now, this tree is dead. We're going to take it down. We're going to slice it like this and then give pieces of it to donors who help us take care of this property. So we will take this down and be able to see when we do how fine this is. Now in a few minutes, a few seconds, we're going across what was the trestle railroad over here. All of this is storm damage. This is the end of the Dunn property, right here. The Rosewood Negro Cemetery is located right over there. You can almost throw a rock to it from here. Now here's what's important here. The conclusion that the black victims of the Rosewood Massacre are buried here does not make sense. Because just beyond my property, maybe about 300 yards or so, was the Carrier house. The Sylvester Carrier, Sarah Carrier home. And that's where the killing of Polly Wilkerson and the other white man took place. That's where the mob gathered to demand that Sylvester Carrier come out so that they could ask him what he knew about the man who allegedly raped Fannie Taylor. Word in the white community of Cedar Key and the surrounding area was that there were black men holed up in the Carrier house killing white men, which was not true. But white people believed it. Some of the white people were so afraid that there were black men killing white people that they took to the go, that they took to the water. They got in houseboats and went out onto the water to protect themselves from what they thought was black violence taking place here at the Carrier house. Now follow this. We have a photograph that shows the burial of the 6 victims of the Rosewood Massacre, the 6 victims of the Rosewood Massacre, in the Shallow Cemetery. Not here, at Shallow, and that makes sense. The photograph shows well-dressed white people, some of them with babes in arms, standing around open graves, which supposedly are going to hold 6 of the Rosewood victims, including Sarah Carrier. At Shallow, 2 miles from here, not here. The reason black victims of the Rosewood Massacre are buried at Shallow is because white people would not have been out here 300 yards from the Carrier house that Sunday when that photograph was taken, burying black victims in that cemetery. It didn't happen. This is a witness tree. The witness tree is a tree that was standing when something historic happened. This tree was here when it happened. This is a witness tree. We're going to take very good care of it too. You watch. So we're walking over to the spring on the property. Thankfully it's a little dry right now, but when the water comes up, it could flood this entire area. So this is all wet right in here. So we believe that the Ford Hotel stood here because the spring is here, right here. You see the water bubbling up? It's a natural spring. There's water throughout this area, but the spring was right here. For example, these 2 stones were put here by somebody. They're not natural features. You see the pipe there? Another pipe, probably conducting the water for people to be able to have access to it. Good reason I don't. So as you leave the Dunn property, going back up towards the hard road, right before you get to the stop sign, you're going to find the Rosewood Well. This is the old Rosewood Well, probably put in by the lumber company when they were timbering out the rosewood trees. Very, very old well. We don't intend to change much of what you see here. This is natural rosewood. This is what rosewood looked like, felt like, sounded like, as long as we can, which is forever. Pretty out here today, even with all the damage from the limbs down. It's still a beautiful sight. I want people to be able to come here just for the peace of it, just for the naturalness of it. And of course, for the fact that this is budded ground. People died out here in these woods. We don't know how many people got caught trying to escape the madness. And that makes this sacred ground, hallowed ground, as far as I'm concerned. It makes it hallowed ground. It makes it worth protecting.